And after high school, they may stop education, and what we're going to do is give them a diploma and a handshake, hopefully. They might go to undergraduate, they might go to college, and at the end of that, we're going to give them a handshake and a diploma and put them out into the real world. If they go on to graduate school, at the end of graduate school, we're going to give them a diploma and a handshake, and we're going to put them out into the real world. The point is that at the end of that pipeline, at the end of the formal education pipeline, we give them a diploma, a handshake, and we dump them out into the real world. And they need to be ready for the real world. The only single goal of formal education is to prepare our students for the real world. That's it. Because once they leave, most of their lives are going to be operating in the real world, and they're on their own. Now, is it true that if we're going to prepare them for the real world as the fundamental goal, we should prepare them to be participating members and contributing members for a just and ethical society? Sure. Should they be able to critically think and problem solve? Sure. Should they have to be lifelong learners? Absolutely. With the way that the job market changes, their jobs may disappear and they have to retrain themselves. So from the standpoint of just a pragmatic objective, they need to be lifelong learners. So you can see that there are lots of secondary goals that derive from the foundational principle that all we do has to well from our objective is to prepare them for the real world. So does everybody see where I'm coming from on this? No?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So now let's go to the disciplinary focus that we're here to talk about, which is STEM. And here is another foundational question that is absolutely important for us as educators to answer. What is STEM education and why do we do it? Now, I think how many of you teach science, either as elementary school generalists or departmentalized teachers of science? How many of you teach science? Only 2? So what are the other disciplines represented in this room, since most of you are not science teachers?
Math, English, language arts.
Language arts.
So this is truly interdisciplinary. So the room right now are teachers of science, grades 5 through 12, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sure that teachers of science consider themselves at some level STEM teachers too. So it's really important to ask the question, what is STEM education and why do we do it? Because really, to be kind of blunt about it, if we don't know what STEM education is and why we do it, we ought not be teaching it and we ought not be saying that we're doing STEM education. So can somebody tell me what they think STEM education is and why we do it?
Why am I the one talking? Science, technology, engineering, math, I mean, that's what it stands for, but it's the direction our world is going. We have a lot of technology and engineering, and in my belief, to teach these kids how to incorporate all the sciences to save, save the planet, save ourselves, and just help them incorporate everything, quit making our education in silos, and let them see it's all one big picture.
Problem solving.
There are pieces of things that you said there that I'm in raging agreement on, but let me ask a devil's advocate question. Are you saying that somehow STEM education is more important in the 21st century than the 20th century?
No, I think that we as human beings want to label everything and make it a new acronym. I think it's all been important throughout, but we have more emerging technologies now. As we advance, we just, help me out here. What am I trying to say? We advance technology.
The technology is more accessible to every person.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. So all we have to do is technology education. We don't need STEM. Just do technology education. Put it in a silo.
If we want to solve problems, they all work together.
Oh, can I add?
Okay. And if I still had any jelly beans left in my jelly bean jar, I would throw both of you some jelly beans, but I don't have any. let me show you where I go with this, okay? The fundamental goal of formal education is to prepare our students for the real world. If we, as inspired educators, have in turn inspired some of our students to body and soul want to go into science and technology fields, like they want to be scientists or engineers, then that means that we need to make sure they understand what is expected of scientists and engineers in the real world before we dump them into the real world. They need to understand what is it, we have to prepare them for the real world. So it's essential for us to ask, what is it that scientists and engineers do? Because we have to allow our students to understand that while they're still in the education pipeline. And if you ask scientists and engineers about this acronym STEM, they kind of look at you a little funny, because in the real world, there is no distinction between science, technology, engineering, and math. It's only one thing. It's one seamless interdisciplinary landscape, and there's no boundaries between them. And so we should always have been teaching STEM if we're trying to represent how scientists and engineers do their thing. And so when a problem is faced by a scientist or an engineer, when they dare to ask the gift of a question and define a problem to be solved, they have to play in all of those different disciplines at once to secure the knowledge necessary to solve the problem. And so in the real world, STEM is one thing. The problem exists in formal education, where we've done something really bad, which is to stovepipe all the disciplines and say that they're independent of one another. What that's saying is that in formal education, we have created a world that bears no reality on the real world. And so if you're going to say, for our students to understand what scientists and engineers actually do, we have to take problems of the real world, authentic real world experiences, and bring them into the pre-college classroom. And in education, we call that project-based learning. We recognize that all of those disciplines are interrelated seamlessly, and therefore we have to take teachers from all of those different stovepipes in an interdisciplinary team and work together to deliver an authentic STEM experience. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so now let's go to the next level in terms of authenticity. I think you can see where I'm heading with this. If NASA or the National Institutes of Health have a precious and limited research asset for the professional community of researchers, not enough to go around to all researchers that want it, maybe it's grant money. How does NASA or NIH equitably and fairly get that asset out to the professional research community, knowing full well that there's not enough of that asset to go around to everybody, to all the researchers that want it? What do?
Open it for proposals.
Yes, they issue what's called an RFP. It stands for Request for Proposals. And research teams all over the country in absolute secrecy design a research program around the use of that asset. And what they do is they write a formal proposal that makes the case for why they ought to get that asset as opposed to the team from Caltech or Berkeley. And that proposal is written against a formal proposal guide that provides everything that needs to be in the proposal. And every one of those research teams, this is the really important part, every one of those research teams understands that they are competing against the very best minds across the United States, because everybody and their grandmother is putting in a proposal. That's where the resources are. And NASA will take all of those proposals and convene a proposal review board, and using the proposal evaluation rubric, they will strictly grade all of those proposals. And the ones with the highest of grades get the asset, and the other teams with lower grades get nothing. And it doesn't matter how hard they worked on that proposal, they get nothing. Can somebody guess what the relative ratio is between the number of teams that get the proposal, get the award letters for the asset and those that get nothing? What's kind of the ratio of those?
1 to 200, 2,000?
Okay, so what you're saying is a small number of teams get the award and the vast majority of teams get nothing. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's exactly right. And so the point is that the competition is absolutely brutal. The real world of science, technology, engineering, and math is a brutal place. And just to give you a sense of that brutality, I have a friend who's at Caltech, a professor at Caltech, that responded to a NASA call for proposals. And she pulled together a team of faculty members to write a proposal, and they worked really, really hard on that proposal. She calculated that they burned through $30,000 in Caltech labor hours to put that proposal in. 8 months later, NASA sent out the award letters and the rejection letters. They got a rejection letter, and it said, your proposal was not even reviewed because the font size in one of your tables was 1 point too small. That's the real world we're preparing our students for. This is really serious stuff. And if we dump them out in the real world after they leave the education pipeline, and we have inspired a number of our students to want to body and soul become scientists and engineers, and only then do they say, wait a second, for me to be a practicing scientist or an engineer, I have to compete? Nobody told me that. And wait a second, for me to be a practicing scientist or an engineer, I have to be an absolutely superb technical writer? I have to be an amazing writer? Nobody told me that. And if that's when they find out, they cannot be practicing scientists and engineers without that skill set. As an example, in academia at universities, what do you think happens to a professor who keeps burning through that university's staff labor hours, putting in proposals and always getting rejection letters? Where do they go? Don't get tenure and it's bye-bye. And those researchers in private industry that are burning through corporate research dollars to submit proposals and they always get rejection, bye-bye. That's the way the world really works. And we, as formal educators, prepare students to work in the real world. So the way to do this is to recognize that the real world of STEM is not just interdisciplinary science, technology, engineering, and math. It is transdisciplinary. It involves very broad and deep oral and written communication skills. It involves teamwork and collaboration. And that's why it's wonderful to see that the team that's over at LCO right now is not just an interdisciplinary team across STEM, but a transdisciplinary team representing reading and literacy and so forth. So does everybody understand where I am with this so far?
Yes.
Okay, so when I was creating this program, what I wanted to do is take an authentic experience from the real world that was truly inspirational, that was not a simulation, and classroom, and not make it a brutal competition, but through teachable moments, introduce students to how to think about designing real experiments against real-world technology and engineering constraints. And introduce students to the notion that in the real world they have to write proposals. Technical writing is important. And introduce students to the way that a competition works. So again, through teachable moments, we begin to introduce students to what is expected of real researchers in STEM. So does everybody understand that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the way that this program works is we're going to give your school your own very real space program. Again, it's not a simulation. We're going to give you one flight slot to fly one of your student team design experiments to the International Space Station in low Earth orbit and have an astronaut assigned to operate that experiment simply as a technician according to your student flight team's protocol. You are not competing with any other community participating in this program. Every one of the 33 Mission 14 communities has one flight slot, one experiment going to space. Every one of those communities has their own real space program. And you are then just like NASA. You have a precious and limited research asset. One of your student teams will be selected to fly an experiment. And after going through a formal microgravity curriculum with your students, you break your students into formal research teams of typically 3 to 5 students per team. And just like professional scientists and engineers, each team in secrecy will design a microgravity experiment, a microgravity research program in a science discipline of their choice. And that experiment must be constrained by the real-world engineering constraints imposed by the flight-certified mini-laboratory they must use. And the science experiment will also, the design of it will also be constrained by the real-world technology of flight operations to and from low Earth orbit. And the science